Nobody expected Coco Gauff to become the spark that lit a wildfire across the tennis world, but that is exactly what happened. In a sport built on discipline, silence, and carefully guarded routines, one unscripted sentence shattered the illusion of control. What unfolded was not a match, not a rivalry, not a comeback story, but a collision of trust, visibility, and modern fame. A private exchange involving Alex Eala and Tommy Paul, never meant for public ears, was suddenly projected onto millions of screens around the globe. The moment lasted seconds, but the shockwaves stretched for weeks, dragging three young stars into a storm none of them had prepared for. This was not just gossip. This was the anatomy of a scandal born in real time. To understand why the reaction was so explosive, you have to understand the weight each person carried into that moment. These were not background players. These were names tied to nations, expectations, and futures far larger than themselves. Alex Eala was more than a promising athlete. In the Philippines, she symbolized possibility. At barely 20, she had already carved her name into history by winning the US Open girls singles title, becoming a beacon for a country starving for representation at the highest levels of tennis. Every appearance she made felt national. Every point she played felt shared. She smiled easily, spoke thoughtfully, and carried herself with a composure that masked how crushing the pressure truly was. Tommy Paul occupied a different space. He was America's quiet contender, a player long seen as talented but unfinished, hovering just below superstardom before finally breaking through. Ranked among the world's elite, he possessed a calm intensity that fans admired. Unlike many of his peers, he kept his personal life locked away. No dramatic posts, no public romances, no manufactured vulnerability. His identity was built on control, and that control made what happened even more destabilizing. When the cameras caught something unscripted, it collided directly with the image he had worked years to maintain. And then there was Coco Gauff, the voice everyone listened to. Already a Grand Slam champion, already a cultural figure, Coco existed at the intersection of sport and influence. She spoke openly, reacted honestly, and carried herself as someone unafraid to be real in a world dominated by rehearsed answers. Fans loved her for it. Media relied on it. But authenticity has a cost, and on one ordinary evening, that cost became painfully clear. When Coco spoke without thinking, she did not just reveal a detail. She opened a door that could never be closed again. The setting seemed harmless. A post-tournament interview session, relaxed and informal, streamed live across multiple platforms. These moments are designed to humanize players, to show laughter after tension, to offer a glimpse behind the curtain. Coco sat comfortably, joking with the interviewer, reflecting on her season, her growth, her relationships on tour. When asked about friendships among young players, she leaned into the topic naturally, talking about support systems and shared experiences. Everything felt safe. Then came the sentence that changed everything. She casually referenced a backstage moment between Alex and Tommy, a brief interaction she framed as something small, something personal, something she assumed meant nothing to anyone else. The shift was instant. The interviewer hesitated. Coco's expression flickered, awareness dawning too late. The broadcast tried to move on, but the damage was already irreversible. Viewers clipped the moment before the segment even ended. Screenshots flew across platforms. Speculation ignited faster than clarification ever could. What exactly had Coco revealed? Why had she said it? And why did it feel like something that was never supposed to leave that room? Within minutes, the tennis internet was unrecognizable. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Were Alex and Tommy involved romantically? Was there a secret relationship? Had something intimate happened backstage? Or was this simply a private exchange inflated by assumption? Silence poured gasoline on the fire. Tommy skipped his scheduled media appearance, his team issuing only a vague note about unavailability. Coco posted a cryptic message hours later, offering reflection but no explanation. Alex said nothing at all. In the vacuum, the internet rushed to fill the space with theories. The hashtag that emerged did not stay confined to tennis. It leapt into mainstream conversation, drawing in people with no stake in the sport but endless appetite for drama. Fans dissected body language from past tournaments, replayed interviews frame by frame, and constructed timelines from stray photos. Innocent interactions were recast as evidence. Neutral moments became loaded symbols. The story was no longer about what happened. It was about what people wanted to believe had happened. For Alex's supporters, especially those from the Philippines, the reaction was fierce and protective. Many saw the moment as a betrayal, an unnecessary exposure of someone who had done nothing to invite scrutiny. Comments flooded social media accusing Coco of jealousy, of carelessness, of exploiting trust for a laugh. Long threads appeared analyzing every past interaction between the two women, searching for proof of hidden resentment. A narrative formed quickly and stubbornly. Alex had been wronged, and Coco was to blame. Coco's fans pushed back just as hard. They argued that nothing truly revealing had been said, that if there was no secret, there was no harm. Some suggested Alex's silence implied guilt, that the panic came not from exposure but from being seen. Others accused Alex of benefiting from the attention, intentionally or not. The language grew harsher. The debate grew uglier. What began as speculation hardened into attack. Tommy's supporters found themselves divided. Some insisted he deserved privacy, that whatever happened was nobody's business. Others expressed disappointment, frustrated that off-court noise might overshadow his progress on court. A smaller but louder group romanticized the situation entirely, producing edits, fan art, and imagined storylines that transformed uncertainty into fantasy. In their hands, the absence of facts became creative freedom. Media outlets watched the engagement numbers climb and followed the momentum. Headlines questioned boundaries, loyalty, and responsibility. Podcasts devoted entire episodes to interpreting a few seconds of footage. Experts were invited to comment on psychology, friendship, and trust. Every angle was explored except the simplest one, asking whether the public was entitled to know any of this at all. National identity slipped into the conversation quietly but unmistakably, shaping loyalties and intensifying emotions. This was no longer just about individuals. It was about sides. As the noise grew louder, the silence from the players became more conspicuous. In a culture addicted to instant responses, the lack of explanation felt provocative. Some interpreted it as strategy. Others saw it as avoidance. But beneath the speculation, something deeper was unfolding. 3 young athletes, all barely out of their teens, were being forced to confront the reality that privacy in their world was conditional at best. What made the situation even more volatile was the absence of a clear villain or a clear crime. No rules had been broken. No contracts violated. Yet reputations were being reshaped in real time. Sponsors watched closely. Public perception shifted by the hour. The sport itself seemed to fade into the background as the story consumed attention. And just as the initial shock began to settle into exhaustion, just as some hoped the frenzy might burn itself out, new fuel appeared. Old photos resurfaced. Grainy images of Alex and Tommy sitting near each other, laughing, talking, existing in the same space. Harmless moments recast as proof. The internet declared the case closed, even though nothing had actually been proven. The fire that had started with one sentence now raged uncontrollably. What no one seemed willing to consider was the possibility that nothing scandalous had ever existed. That the truth, whatever it was, might be ordinary. That the intensity of the reaction said more about the audience than the players. But at that moment, reason had little power. The story had escaped its creators. And as the world waited for someone to speak, the pressure behind the silence continued to build, promising that when the truth finally emerged, it would have to fight its way through a mountain of assumptions first. 48 hours after the interview detonated across the internet, the noise had not faded. It had mutated. What began as shock had hardened into expectation. People were no longer just speculating, they were demanding answers. In a world where silence is interpreted as guilt, the refusal of Alex Eala, Coco Gauff, and Tommy Paul to immediately explain themselves felt like an act of defiance. Every hour without clarification fed the belief that something serious was being hidden. The calm that surrounded their public profiles before now felt unnatural, almost suspicious, as if restraint itself had become a provocation. The first official move came from Coco's camp. Her management released a statement that was measured, respectful, and carefully balanced. It spoke of valuing friendships, of regret for unintended discomfort, of private outreach and hopes for understanding. On paper, it said all the right things. In reality, it satisfied no one. The wording avoided specifics, naming no names, offering no clarity about what had actually been referenced on air. To critics, it sounded like corporate insulation rather than personal accountability. To supporters, it was a reminder that not every mistake deserves public punishment. The statement landed softly, but the ground beneath it was already shaking. Alex's response arrived later, and it was quieter still. No interview. No explanation. Just an image posted online of her practicing alone as the sun dipped below the horizon, her shadow stretching across an empty court. The caption was brief, almost cryptic, a line about control and focus. It was not a denial. It was not a confirmation. It was a boundary. But boundaries mean little to an audience that believes it owns the narrative. The comments beneath her post filled instantly, a chaotic mix of encouragement, anger, sympathy, and entitlement. Some urged her to stay strong. Others demanded transparency. Many simply wanted the story to continue. Behind the scenes, her team chose a deliberate path. They issued a statement not to international outlets, but to Filipino media, reinforcing that her attention remained on competition, that her personal life was not open for speculation, and that rumors would not be entertained. The phrasing emphasized her youth, her right to privacy, and the unfairness of the scrutiny. It was a subtle but powerful reminder that beneath the headlines was a young woman still navigating adulthood under a microscope. For her home audience, the message resonated deeply. For everyone else, it was dismissed as avoidance. Tommy Paul remained invisible. No posts. No comments. No acknowledgement. His silence became its own storyline. Some praised it as discipline, a refusal to legitimize gossip. Others condemned it as abandonment, arguing that he was leaving two women to absorb the fallout of something he was also involved in. The longer he stayed quiet, the more his absence was filled with assumption. Silence, in this environment, was not neutral. It was interpreted, reshaped, and weaponized. As official voices withdrew, unofficial ones rushed forward. Anonymous sources appeared everywhere, each claiming insight, each contradicting the last. One insisted that Coco had apologized directly and been rejected. Another claimed Alex and Tommy had been quietly seeing each other and were furious the secrecy had been broken. A third dismissed the entire thing as an overblown misunderstanding, nothing more than encouragement between colleagues. The problem was not that these stories existed. It was that people chose the versions that fit their preferred narrative and treated them as fact. Meanwhile, the consequences began to materialize beyond social media. Sponsors monitored sentiment closely, wary of association with controversy. Public relations teams recalibrated messaging. Tournament organizers braced for awkward press conferences. The governing bodies stayed silent, officially uninvolved but acutely aware that three of the sport's brightest young faces were being reshaped by something entirely unrelated to performance. Tennis itself had become secondary. The spectacle was the story. Then came the image that reignited everything. A backstage photograph surfaced, time-stamped shortly before the interview that started it all. Alex and Tommy were seated close together, smiling, relaxed, his hand resting casually on her shoulder. The photo was ordinary, the kind taken hundreds of times at tournaments around the world. But context no longer mattered. The image was treated as confirmation, proof that speculation had been justified all along. It spread faster than any statement ever could, reframed with captions that suggested secrecy, intimacy, deception. The fire, which had begun to smolder, roared back to life. What made the situation especially troubling was how quickly the tone shifted from curiosity to judgment. People spoke with certainty about emotions they could not see and intentions they could not know. Allegiances hardened. Fans defended not individuals but versions of them they had constructed. The story was no longer fluid. It was fixed, even though the facts remained unclear. 10 days after the initial moment, when exhaustion had begun to replace outrage, the truth finally entered the conversation. It did not arrive through a press release or a staged announcement. It came through a long, thoughtful interview Alex Eala gave to a journalist she trusted, someone who had followed her journey since her junior years. The setting was calm. The tone was honest. There was no drama in her voice, only weariness. She explained that there was no romance, no secret relationship, no betrayal. Tommy, she said, was a friend. A long-standing one. They had known each other for years, crossing paths repeatedly as juniors, reconnecting more frequently as their professional careers overlapped. Before her final match at the tournament, She had been overwhelmed by nerves. The weight of expectation, the significance of the moment, had nearly pulled her apart. Tommy noticed. He sat with her backstage, talked her through it, reminded her of her preparation and her right to be there. That was the moment Coco referenced. Nothing more. Nothing less. As Alex spoke, the simplicity of the explanation contrasted sharply with the chaos it had inspired. She described telling Coco about it later, not as gossip, but as gratitude, sharing a meaningful moment with a friend. She admitted that hearing it repeated publicly hurt, not because it revealed wrongdoing, but because it exposed something personal that had never been meant for an audience. She acknowledged Coco's mistake without condemning her, recognizing how easily words can slip out under lights and microphones. When asked directly about dating rumors, Alex dismissed them gently but firmly. Even if it had been true, she said, she struggled to understand why it would be public property. Friendship, she emphasized, did not require explanation. Privacy did not require justification. Her disappointment was not in being misunderstood, but in being forced to clarify something that should never have required defense. The interview shifted the atmosphere almost immediately. For the first time since the incident, there was a version of events anchored in a named voice, a real perspective rather than speculation. Some people accepted it instantly, relieved to see the situation grounded in reality. Others resisted, unwilling to abandon the drama they had invested in. Truth, it turned out, was less compelling than outrage. 2 days later, Tommy Paul finally spoke, choosing restraint over elaboration. His post was simple, a photo from practice, the two of them relaxed and smiling, accompanied by a caption about real friendship and returning focus to tennis. There was no explanation, no apology, no engagement with rumors. It was a statement of alignment rather than defense, an attempt to close the chapter without feeding it further. Coco followed in her own way, addressing the situation directly through a short video. She acknowledged her mistake without hedging, admitting that she had shared something that was not hers to share. She apologized publicly to Alex, emphasizing growth, responsibility, and learning. The message felt raw and unfiltered, a reminder of why people had trusted her voice in the first place. It did not erase what had happened, but it reframed it as a human error rather than a calculated act. Slowly, the temperature dropped. Headlines softened. Conversations shifted. The absence of scandal became undeniable. What remained was an uncomfortable realization. An entire narrative had been constructed from fragments, fueled by assumption, sustained by engagement. The story that had consumed the tennis world had never truly existed. And as the dust settled, a new question emerged, quieter but more unsettling than any rumor. If this much damage could be done without wrongdoing, what did that say about the culture watching from the outside? When the final explanations were finally spoken and the real story stood exposed in plain light, something unexpected happened. The chaos did not immediately disappear. Instead, it lingered, clinging to comment sections, echoing in late-night debates, and resurfacing in subtle ways that proved how difficult it is to reverse a narrative once it has taken hold. Even with clarity, even with honesty, some people refused to let go. They had invested too much emotion, too much certainty, too much identity into a version of events that made them feel justified. Admitting the truth meant admitting participation in a storm that never needed to exist. For Alex Eala, the aftermath was complex. Publicly, her career did not stall. If anything, her profile grew. More eyes followed her matches. More fans rallied behind her composure and restraint. Her interview was praised for its maturity, her refusal to attack anyone seen as strength rather than weakness. In the Philippines, she became more than a rising star. She became a symbol of dignity under pressure, someone who refused to let noise dictate her path. But privately, the experience left its mark. Those close to her noticed changes that statistics could not show. She became more guarded, more selective with her trust, more aware that even kindness could be misinterpreted when filtered through millions of strangers. The innocence of shared moments had been altered forever. Coco Gauff faced the most direct scrutiny, and she did not run from it. Instead of hiding behind silence or legal language, she leaned into accountability. She spoke openly in later interviews about the responsibility that comes with having a platform, about the difference between honesty and carelessness. She acknowledged that authenticity without awareness can cause harm, even when intentions are pure. For many fans, this response reinforced why they believed in her in the first place. She did not deny the mistake. She absorbed it, learned from it, and allowed it to shape her growth. Her friendship with Alex, while changed, was not destroyed. It became quieter, more cautious, built on a clearer understanding of boundaries. Some wounds do not vanish, but they can heal into something wiser. Tommy Paul returned to competition with the same quiet focus that had always defined him. On court, he let results speak. Strong performances followed, along with praise for his composure during a period that could have easily derailed him. Off court, he remained reserved, answering questions with brief deflections, making it clear that the past would not be his headline. His relationship with Alex remained visible in subtle ways: shared warm-ups, relaxed conversations, moments that signaled continuity rather than rupture. In choosing restraint, he reaffirmed his belief that not every story deserves a response. Yet the most important consequences of the incident extended far beyond these three individuals. What unfolded became a mirror held up to the culture surrounding modern sports. It revealed how quickly audiences confuse access with entitlement, how the line between public interest and private life has eroded almost entirely. Fans demanded transparency while simultaneously punishing vulnerability. They insisted on authenticity but reacted with outrage when authenticity produced imperfection. The contradiction was stark and uncomfortable. The episode also highlighted how identity shapes perception. National loyalty, gender expectations, and cultural narratives quietly influenced reactions. Support and criticism were not distributed evenly. They followed familiar fault lines, revealing biases that often remain hidden until a controversy exposes them. What should have been a moment of reflection instead became a battlefield where empathy was sacrificed for allegiance. In response, subtle changes rippled through the professional tennis world. Players became more cautious in group settings, more aware of microphones and cameras, more reluctant to speak freely. Media training intensified. Public relations teams gained greater control. The spontaneous moments that once humanized athletes were slowly filtered out, replaced by safer, blander interactions. The cost of this shift was intangible but real. A sport built on individuality began to feel more scripted, more distant. The question lingered: was this protection, or was it loss? At its core, the incident raised fundamental questions about boundaries. Does fame erase the right to privacy, or should it demand stronger protections? Who decides what is fair to share, and who bears the consequences when those decisions go wrong? In an era where everything can be recorded, clipped, and redistributed without context, mistakes are no longer fleeting. They are permanent. And permanence changes behavior. The saddest realization was not that the scandal occurred, but that it was inevitable. The system rewards outrage. Algorithms amplify conflict. Calm explanations arrive too late to compete with sensationalism. Even after the truth emerged, some corners of the internet clung to alternative versions, not because they were believable, but because they were more entertaining. Drama, after all, generates engagement. Reality rarely does. Months later, as new tournaments captured attention and fresh controversies emerged, this story faded from the front page. But it did not disappear entirely. It remained as a cautionary tale whispered among players, a reminder that trust must be guarded as carefully as technique. It lived on in altered behavior, in friendships kept deliberately surface level, in conversations that never happened because the risk felt too high. For Alex, Coco, and Tommy, survival did not mean erasure. It meant adaptation. They emerged wiser, more aware of the invisible weight carried by every word and gesture. They learned that in their world, intention does not always matter as much as perception, and silence can be both shield and burden. Their careers moved forward, but with an added layer of vigilance that youth should never have to carry so early. And for the audience, the incident offered a choice. It asked whether we would continue consuming athletes as characters rather than people, whether we would demand perfection from individuals still learning who they are, whether we would keep mistaking curiosity for ownership. It challenged us to consider the damage done by speculation masquerading as concern. The story began with a single sentence spoken without malice and spiraled into a global spectacle that forced three young athletes to defend their humanity. When the dust settled, nothing scandalous remained. No betrayal. No secret romance. No conspiracy. Just a friend offering support, another friend speaking carelessly, and a public eager to turn fragments into fiction. Alex Eala, Coco Gauff, and Tommy Paul moved on. They continued playing, competing, growing. The real question is whether we did. Whether the next time a private moment slips into public view, we pause before judging. Whether we remember that behind every headline is a person navigating pressures we will never fully understand. Because if this incident taught anything, it is that the greatest damage was never done by words spoken on live television. It was done by the millions of voices that rushed to fill the silence, convinced they deserved an answer that was never owed to them in the first place.